Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I am Emily Molden, Executive Director of the Nantucket Land Council. Welcome to our fourth installment of our Clean Water Topics on Tap series. This will be the final program in our series this summer, and we really appreciate your participation. I just want to take a moment to once again thank our sponsors for this program, the Donnellan Family Wines, Cisco Brewers, Ernst Land Design, and the Nantucket Shellfish Association. And without their support, these programs would not be possible. So a big shout out to all of them. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our work, the Land Council is a nonprofit environmental organization that has been working to protect and preserve Nantucket's natural resources since 1974. We have a strong focus on the island's fragile water resources, from our incredible groundwater reserves to our freshwater ponds, our coastal wetlands, harbors, and beyond. We're also very interested in promoting good government policies to help preserve these resources and in educating the community on a variety of local environmental issues. So today's topic is coastal plastics, nearshore problems, island solutions. And this is a topic that's near and dear to me and has been an interest and a concern of mine for many years. I had the opportunity when I was in college to participate in a Sea Education Association semester, or a sea semester, out of Woods Hole. And my crew and I sailed the SSV westward, out of Woods Hole, east of Bermuda, and down into the Caribbean over a 6-week period. We conducted a variety of scientific research projects along the way, one of which was investigating ocean plastics. Passing through the Sargasso Sea and other areas of the Atlantic and beginning to understand the potential impacts that our actions back at home and our overwhelming dependence on and obsession with plastics was having on such a faraway and pristine environment had a pretty big impact on me. The Land Council early on took a pretty strong interest in the fate of solid waste here on Nantucket and the impacts that it has on our island. Well before my time, the Land Council was a strong advocate for the plastic bag ban, which was originally voted on and approved in the 1989 annual town meeting. As an island 30 miles out to sea, we just have even greater responsibility to manage our solid waste appropriately and prevent the pollution of our surrounding waters. We've continued to improve our policies by banning other items such as lighter than air balloons, as well as our latest 2020 single-use plastic ban that went into effect in June. There's still a lot to learn about the implications of all the plastics that we've already released into the environment, but there are also a lot of very simple ways that we can all help to reduce our impacts for the future. So before I introduce our speaker this evening, just one note on our Zoom protocol. At the end of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers, and we definitely invite you to ask any questions. And when that time comes, I'll be asking you to type your questions into the Q&A box that you can find down at the bottom of your Zoom screen on your home computer. So I was very excited to first meet tonight's speaker, Graeme Durovich. She is our recycling and solid waste coordinator and actually started working for the DPW, I think exactly 2 years ago. She grew up between two beautiful parts of the North American East Coast, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Nova Scotia, Canada. She has a master's degree in coastal and marine management from a university over in Iceland. And her thesis focused on environmental factors of marine litter accumulation. And she also analyzed human nature dynamics of marine litter pollution through social theories. At her core, Graeme is most passionate about a clean and healthy ocean. And through her research, she learned that improving waste management systems is one of the most effective and efficient ways to prevent plastic leaks into the environment. So here she is. I'm very pleased to welcome Graeme Durovich.
Hi, thank you so much, Emily and Land Council, for having me. And thank you all for coming today. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my passions with you and looking at how we can do this better. Let me just switch to sharing my screen. So as Emily mentioned, we're going to be talking a bit about coastal plastics, where they come from, and then what are some mitigation and prevention measures. And I want to start with these two field photos of two pieces of litter. As you may be able to tell, they are from packaging from a pair of Boggs rain boots. As Emily mentioned, I went to graduate school in Iceland to study coastal litter, which for me meant months and months of documenting and collecting litter in all types of weather and wind. If you've been to Iceland, even in the summer, chances are you know what I'm talking about. I did this in two adjacent areas. In the top left photo, you can see my sandy beach transect area where I sampled. And then along the right side of that, there's this rock wall armor. And you can see that in more depth in the lower right-hand picture from the other side. And that was my other place. So I was looking both at the sand beach and then up above. And this is where I ultimately found those two plastic packaging labels caught by the rock armor, which held the labels back from getting down to the sand beach and ultimately the ocean. So why in the thousands of pieces of litter I found do I share these two with you? So these two labels are undoubtedly from a pair of boots that a friend brought from the US for me. Now these labels, I had put them properly into the recycling bin, but finding them in my study area was a major aha moment for me. I immediately recognized my explicit contribution to plastic pollution here and my responsibility for waste, not just improperly throwing it away, but for its existence in what I know to be an imperfect waste management system. And so that ultimately is what has brought me to this work. So what's the problem and how big is it really? We have some new numbers that came out this year from a report from the Pew Charitable Trust and Systemics, a lot of other knowledge partners that they worked with. About 40% of the plastic waste in the world ends up in the environment, which in 2016 meant about 12 million US tons. According to this newly released report, if we continue as we are currently doing with our plastic pollution, it will double by 2040, and there will be 4 times as much total plastics in the ocean at that point. So many of us are aware of what has become known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's an area about twice the size of Texas in the North Pacific, where plastic is accumulating in the surface waters. However, it is estimated that floating litter accounts for only about 15% of marine litter. Another 15% is found in coastal environments like along our beaches. And the remaining 70% is dispersed throughout the water column, so at different depths of the ocean, on the sea floor, and in the marine food web. Nearly 1/3 of plastics produced are manufactured into single-use items, which we've been talking a lot about on this island recently. And these items are disposed of within a year of production, typically. So in other words, within a relatively short time span, we're creating a large quantity of plastics, which likely will never fully go away. And it's taken just about half a century to build these systems that are flooding our ocean with plastic. So how did we get here? Well, plastics were first created in the early 1900s. However, they didn't widely become into general population use until after the Second World War. At that time, they were heralded with much excitement and anticipation. And we can see this from this book excerpt that I have here on the screen from 1945. The general idea is that plastic will set us free from mothholes and rust, and our dependence on natural resources that was limited to what was locally available. In their perception, plastics presented these almost magical, boundless possibilities. And we've seen that in how it's manifested in our lives today. But as we know, they've also come with the downsides, which we'll talk about in a second. But if we just take a second to focus on why we have plastics and our appreciation for them, certainly they've gotten to where they are today because of their versatility, durability, and most of all, affordability. Plastics have become ubiquitous with their cheap and convenient usages that makes this disposable era that we live in possible. And they've also helped us achieve life-changing medical advances. Being so lightweight in comparison to metals and glass, they also provide full fuel savings, lowering both greenhouse gases and cost by about 50%. So it's not all bad, but we'll get to that and talk about those negative impacts now. So why should we care about plastic litter and what are some of those negative impacts? Well, we know that unfortunately, the abundance of plastics and our perception of them as disposable rather than a precious commodity leads to plastics in the environment, as we saw earlier, with about 40% of our waste, plastic waste, ending up in the environment. This is largely due to leaks in our waste collection and waste management systems, or in some parts of the world, inadequate or non-existent waste systems. Littering also contributes, whether it's on land or sea. About 80% of the litter in the ocean, plastics in the ocean, comes from the land-based sources rather than being thrown overboard on ships, which is illegal. As you have no doubt heard, we've got plastics in our food system now. Animals eat plastic, mistaking them for food, and of course we end up eating those foods. Also hurts the animals and their digestive tracts, and can sometimes lead to starvation. It's still unknown how much plastics are really in our food system and in what quantities and how they will affect us as humans. But there's significant evidence to suggest that there are numerous health effects to humans and animals, not just from the plastics, but from the pollutants that bind to the plastics and are transported by the plastics, such as persistent organic pollutions. So as humans, places we can get microplastics and plastics, very small pieces of plastics, is through our food, water, especially bottled water, like plastic bottled water, which thankfully should be almost no more in Nantucket. And then even via the air. There's been recent studies showing that even in remote places in the US, or in the world rather, the Pyrenees, for instance, plastic has been found transported there by the wind and can be found in our air. So it just gives us a sense of how ubiquitous plastics have come. And since they are so new, last half century, we really don't know the extent of impacts that they will have. There are also significant costs that come with plastics. Just to the marine industries in the South Asia Pacific region, in 2008, there was over $1.2 billion in damages. And that's just focusing on the marine industry damages in that specific region. Of course, as plastic pollution increases, the costs of that will go up. And then we have climate change going on, which we've all no doubtly heard about, and it's causing sea level rise and coastal resiliency issues that we experience here on this island. Plastics are intricately linked with oil, gas, and coal, the fossil fuels that are helping to drive climate change. And they are also the building blocks for plastics. The extraction, land disturbance, and transport that goes into these is very carbon intensive. And then of course, managing the plastics, whether it be getting it off island or transporting it once it's off island to a landfill or to a facility for further processing, it's expensive. it's expensive, but it's also very energy intensive. And recycling, of course, is also very energy intensive. And so this is feeding this loop, spiraling feedback loop with climate change. We talked a little bit about the global sources and pathways and leaks of plastics into the environment, the main ones. And then I thought we could look a little bit about what's happening here locally. There are numerous issues. By and large, we have a fairly good waste management system and collection system that reaches everyone on the island. It's certainly available and free to everyone on the island. So nobody has the excuses of not having places to put their waste or the money to deal with it. But we do have issues with littering, as we see on the left. On windy days at the landfill, things could get blown out of bins at the recycling center, or when people are dumping their bins into the larger containers, the roll-off containers. Wind can play a role there, as we've seen. Transport to the recycling center as well is an issue, whether it be by the haulers or by individual residents who have not securely covered their loads. And the last thing I want to touch on is the plastic contamination in our compost, which is another vector for plastics into the environment. On the bottom right, you can see there's small pieces of plastics in this pile of compost. And this is thankfully not our compost, but it's an issue we had earlier. And we've worked on additional screening, as you'll see, and we're working on other initiatives that I hope you all are helping with. In our top left is a picture of the tipping floor where the waste comes in before it enters the composter. This is a picture from prior to 2018 when we made some waste stream changes, which I will talk about subsequently. But it gives you a feel of how much plastics there are. And the pile doesn't look too different, unfortunately, at this point. We're working on it. And below that are these piles of bales. This is the contamination, all that plastic that you see in that top left-hand picture of what comes through the composter and then gets screened out so it doesn't go into our compost. This is what gets landfilled on Nantucket, and it's the only thing landfilled here. So if there were no contamination in our compost stream, there wouldn't be no bales of contamination and nothing going into our compost. On the bottom right is a picture of our compost. You may be able to see the green specks in there, and there are a few other pieces of plastic in there you might be able to spot. The compost that comes out of the composter is screened multiple times, even after those initial large bales of contamination are taken out. But ultimately, those smaller pieces of plastic still slip through the screens with the compost material. This, of course, gets used on properties around Nantucket and is spread further. So ultimately, we would be able to have a clean compost product that benefits the users better because it's a clean compost product and more valuable to them, but also so that it's not spreading plastics into the environment. So to work on this problem, we took a look at our current system at the time, which was having the recyclable waste streams, all 4 of them, shipping boxes, plastics, tin, aluminum, and glass. And then we had household waste. And we realized that what we wanted to see going into the composter was what would turn to dirt, paper, and food scraps. And this is what we call compostable waste, what turns into compost. Everything else needed to go into a different place so that it wouldn't be contaminating our compost and the other issues we just talked about. So this was called non-recyclable, non-compostable waste, or everything else. So basically you can read this guide from left to right. Nothing changed with our recyclables, but rather emphasize that what goes into the composter should just be food and paper, and then everything else that doesn't fit in those categories goes into non-recyclable, non-compostable waste. It's really not a waste stream that is easy to define, but it doesn't need to be, because it's simply kind of everything else. Here are some pictures though of what that everything else looks like sometimes. A lot of plastic film, protein bar wrappers, and miscellaneous items like rubber bands, for instance, that obviously don't go in the recycling streams, but it's also not food or paper. So part of this challenge in making these changes comes with behavior change, which we all know is tricky, but also can be very based in common sense. And when we think about plastics entering the environment and understanding that a certain percentage is entering the environment currently because of our current systems or lack thereof in some parts of the world, we can look at how we can reduce and prevent plastic in the first place. So this starts with kind of refusing plastic when it's offered to you, rethinking it, and then redesigning it at kind of corporate levels or even business levels. So if you own a local business, it's something you can consider. Then comes reducing and reusing plastics and using different materials if possible. These two all come with common sense, really. As I mentioned, it's about turning off the tap when the bathtub's overflowing. You wouldn't just try to mop the floor and leave the bathtub running. Try to turn off the tap as much as possible and deal with the flood in your bathroom. And the waste hierarchy continues with focusing on preparation for reuse. And then obviously when you have plastics and you need a way to deal with them, recycling them, composting, which that's for general waste management, so it doesn't pertain to us with plastics. Here necessarily an anaerobic digestion, which we do not have here on the island currently. Next comes in this waste hierarchy, material and chemical recovery. This is gasification, pyrolysis, these technologies, for instance. These are not deemed as beneficial as recycling, say, which is a closed loop system. Hopefully a plastic bottle that gets recycled will be made again into another plastic bottle. Whereas with chemical recovery, you're turning it into a fuel. So you're not keeping that cycle pure, and then that fuel is eventually used and it's gone. Lastly is residuals management and landfill, ultimately at the end. And for communities in Europe, not just Zero Waste Europe, which is an organization, landfilling has become unacceptable over there. We've done our own little bit here on Nantucket to minimize single-use plastics and work on the reduction end of things. Some of you may have heard, if you've been around for a bit, about our 2020 plastics ban. This was a citizen warrant article put forth by a citizen from Nantucket who was concerned about the environmental impacts of the landfill and waste on our global environment. And these were the 6 groups of items that were voted to be banned at special town meeting in 2018. This ban went into effect on June 1st of this year, so just a couple months ago. And it took about a month or two to get it kind of more implemented, especially at the larger stores where they were having issues with supply given COVID pandemic and all the issues there. But we're working towards having that everyone come into compliance. This can be as simple as if you see something in a store, you can remind a shop owner about this. And certainly if people have questions about where to source things, I believe through the chamber, you can talk to other businesses who have figured it out, or of course you can reach out to the plastics group or me, and we can connect you with someone who can help, and of course help in any way that we can. This comes after other bans that we've had in the past here, for instance, lighter than air balloons. And even before that, a biodegradable packaging bylaw that citizens voted on in 1989. So that's your plastic bag ban, essentially, but it goes further than that with takeout containers, for instance. So that was really wonderful, the community way back then, to make that initiative. We're hearing a lot of celebration now about communities finally taking that step to ban plastic bags, and Nantucket was really ahead of the curve back then, taking that initiative and seeing the implications of plastics on the environment back then. And certainly plastic bags and that light film packaging is the #1 contributor to plastics in the environment. I think it counts for about 30% of production, but it counts for 80% of the plastics in the environment. So that's a really big step that made a difference here. So we're also trying to get a better understanding of what is our plastic issue here. There's some numerous great initiatives here that focus on cleanup. Again, it's something we need, but it always feels a bit like a fool's errand, knowing just the additional leaks that are always happening. So whenever we can work smarter from the head end to minimize plastic getting into the environment in the first place, that's the best way to go. And so just about a year ago, Nantucket, the town of Nantucket and the DPW, we reached out to the UMASS field station and UMass Boston to see if they would be willing and interested to lead Nantucket's first coastal plastic study. And subsequently, Land Council became involved. And together we've been sampling 3 spots around Nantucket: the harbor by the town pier, Nantucket Harbor, and then Surfside Beach seasonally for macroplastics and microplastics in the sand, water, and oysters or clams where they're available. This first year of sampling was funded by a grant by Remain Nantucket, and Nantucket Land Council has graciously stepped up to fund this project going forward so we can have a more robust data set and can also track changes long-term. So big thanks to them. And then the goal, of course, is to understand what plastics we have here and where and when they also show up, if it's a seasonal pattern. And also try to get a sense, if possible, where they might be coming from so we can better understand our local impact, as well as establish effective and evidence-based prevention and management measures in the future. So I have a few pictures of our plastics that we've taken from this, but I first want to just explain a little bit. On the left is our transect. So we, at each of those groups of 4 flags, we take a sample of sand. And then we're also, that's where we're looking for microplastics. And then we're also scanning the entire beach in that area for macroplastics. We take samples of water, and then this is Surfside, so we did not find any clams or oysters naturally. We had a big sampling group last winter, and that's a picture of us, a lot of UMass Boston students who came down. And then the bottom picture is of the UMass field station, and Yvonne there has been very graciously storing all the samples while they're waiting to get to Boston for processing. And we're hoping to do some processing down here. But we certainly have a backlog of samples to look through and analyze. And so we have very little data right now, but that's where all of our data is sitting. So I'm looking forward to having that data available. Here are a few pictures from our May 2020 sample. It's not fully representative of the plastics that we found in May at Surfside, but it gives you a sense of the types of plastics that we're finding. So the balloons, there's some fragments of plastic film at the bottom, and looks like a cup as well that's usually covered with wax, plastic wax. Some small fragments, which is usually what we find mostly in the environment. Plastics break down into smaller pieces, creating microplastics. essentially small plastics. And then there's a fair bit of rope, as you may have seen it when you go down there. So that's likely coming from elsewhere in that location. And so I have just a few preliminary results from the fall sample that I want to share with you, but certainly we're looking forward to having more data to share with you soon. So this is from the fall of 2019. And of course, these are very preliminary results. There is one data point for the summer. But right now, just on this one sample, we see that Nantucket Harbor had the most microplastics per liter of water. Nantucket had the middle amount at around 7, and then Surfside Beach had the lowest in our sample of 2. So this is quite a small sample size still, and we're looking to be able to compare this to other samples that we have collected. I want to leave you with a couple resources if you want to learn more, because there's a lot of different aspects that one can look at this, and we kept it brief today so we can make time for some questions. Up top is just the website for the town solid waste. And from there, you can navigate to the Plastics Ban webpage or get more information on Nantucket's waste management system and environmental monitoring that we do around the landfill and other town sustainability initiatives like the Energy Office. Next, the UN Environment Program is offering a free online course on marine litter starting in October. And I'm really excited to see this happening. It happened, I believe, in 2014 or 15 for the first time, and they're offering it again. So if you are interested, I believe there's a 2-week course and then maybe an additional 8-week course to learn more about marine litter in general. Breaking the Plastic Wave is the report that I mentioned in the beginning of this talk. They have a lot of really great information about what the issue is globally, as well as how to approach the issue going forward with prevention initiatives, and as well as connecting people to waste management systems, basically. And it's a really interesting report to look at. I would highly recommend. And then there's also this book called Plastic, A Toxic Love Story, definitely lighter reading by Susan Frankel, which gives you a sense of the relationships between humans and plastics and the effects on human, environmental, and animal health. Pam Longobardi is someone I came across during my thesis research, and she makes installations and sculptures out of coastal and ocean plastics that she finds from around the world. And her sculptures and installations and some photographs as well are very thought-provoking. So if you want to go about this from a different angle, there's that. And then lastly, in terms of reading, is Rob Nixon's Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. And if you want to get an idea of why we're not making the changes to these big, complex environmental issues, this gives a good sense of why it's so challenging and tricky, and some of the stumbling blocks we're coming up against in the way that we understand the world around us. I highly recommend that book. And then another resource that I would ask you to take advantage of when the issue presents itself is the Nantucket Police Department. Their number is there, and if you see littering, for instance, blowing out of the back of somebody's vehicle, you can take down the plate and call them and let them know, and they will remind people about securing their loads. And certainly that makes a big difference in our environment if you've ever driven down Pulpus or Milestone or Nantucket or virtually anywhere else on the island. And then there's some local cleanup initiatives that I would encourage you to get involved in if you're interested, or just take the time when you're out about on your own to pick up litter and notice it around you. Nantucket Clean Team meets every week in the summer on Saturdays. There's the Nantucket Litter Derby that Leah Mojer and I have organized, and we're hoping we'll have one this fall to make up for the spring that got postponed. And then of course, Nantucket Land Council's Trash Tag Week that happened earlier, actually last month, about a month ago. And I believe Emily is going to give a bit of information about that. So I just want to thank you again for coming. My contact information is in the bottom right, and I welcome you to reach out to me with any questions or concerns you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graeme. Certainly a lot of really good information and really important ongoing conversation for Nantucket going forward. So I'm going to invite everyone to please feel free to begin entering some questions for Graeme in the Q&A box that you can again find by moving your cursor down to the bottom of your Zoom window. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for all of you to enter some questions for us, I just wanted to give a brief report on the Nantucket Land Council's first annual trash tag that we held this past August, the beginning of August. It was a great event put on primarily by the Nantucket Land Council Associates. And for the first year, I think we had a pretty great turnout. So we're showing here some of the results of this week-long trash pickup initiative. We had about 50 volunteers total, plus some family members, I'm sure, that participated. They picked up over 1,000 pieces of litter, 63 pounds of trash total. That included 104 food wrappers, 45 takeout containers, 17 straws, 379 pieces of plastic, probably broken down from larger plastic items on their way to becoming microplastics, 163 cigarette butts, and 42 grocery bags. So a lot of trash, and the participants of this trash tag week were able to keep track of the trash they collected using an app called the CleanSwell app that we were able to make use of and better track and account for what was actually collected. I think this was a really great success. We're really excited to move towards another one next year, next summer, although we're thinking of actually making it a month-long trash tag pickup for folks next summer to participate in. So save the date for August next year, 2021, for our next trash tag event. It was definitely a great way this summer, considering the conditions, to enable people to go out and really do their part and be part of a bigger group effort without some of the other organized events that Graeme had mentioned. So great success for us. Okay, and thanks to all of you who participated in that. So it looks like we definitely have some questions that have come in here. So I can pass some of these along to you, Graeme. The first question that I have here is, why hasn't Nantucket promoted or advertised the difference and the recycling of plastic film that can be returned to Stop and Shop that you can depress with a thumb and stiff film that goes in the trash? And I can kind of reread that. Why hasn't Nantucket promoted or advertised more the difference of recycling plastic film that can be returned to Stop and Shop that you can depress with a thumb and stiff film that goes in the trash?
Thank you. Yeah, we're very delighted that Stop and Shop has made a bigger effort in getting that stuff off the island and communicating that better. And certainly us as a town can do a better job letting people know. It is in our A to Z list of kind of where to throw different items, an encyclopedia of sorts. I think there maybe has been one or two Instagram posts, but certainly we can do a better job of that. It's on the list of how we can do better on the website, and certainly increase the website in terms of how to reduce waste and how to best manage it. Thank you. Yeah, so for those who don't know, maybe I'll just explain it. For film plastics, those soft plastics that are like a trash bag, for instance, dry cleaning bag, Ziploc bag, when you squeeze it, it's kind of quiet compared to, say, a chip bag or this really crackly plastic. Those quieter plastics can go to Stop and Shop. They have a black trash bin outside of their shop, a few of them, and one of them is for film plastics. And they take that off island to their regional facility. I have visited, I've seen it go in there, and they get made into large bales and sent to Trex, who makes benches out of them, plastic benches and plastic boards essentially out of them.
Great, perfect. Thanks for that. And then also a follow-up about the green produce bags that you get from the supermarket and how people may not realize that those are compostable. And I think that that's probably a great opportunity to ask you to speak in a little bit more detail about the compostable plastics that we see, how they differ from regular recyclable plastics, and how they should currently be treated in our waste stream.
Yes, thank you, Emily. So yes, those bags are compostable plastics. Compostable plastics typically take industrial composters to break them down, which necessitates certain temperatures, which we meet in our composter, which is not an industrial composter, but also certain lengths of time, which we do not meet with how our composter is run. So compostable plastics are likely not breaking down in our composter and any contamination with the other plastics and into the Nantucket landfill. So we're asking right now for people, if they have plastics, compostable plastics, to treat it like normal petroleum-based plastics. For instance, if it's a cup, it would get recycled, put in the recycling, and then if it's something like a compostable plastic bag, that would go into non-recyclable, non-compostable waste, everything else.
Great, okay, thank you. Another question is actually more about the clean team. How does the clean team get funded? I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the clean team, Graeme, since that has come up.
Sure. So I'm not precisely sure where all their funding comes from, but I think in the past, some of the funds from the Trash and Show has gone to Clean Team to fund them through the year. But largely it's just the group of people showing up every Saturday, and there's not too much expense. It's just kind of a friendly group that comes together to clean up trash rather than doing it individually. So as we know, you can walk out without really much of anything and pick up trash.
Okay, next question, a great one. How much research has been done on the effects of plastics on the shellfish in the harbor?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been any research done here on Nantucket. Certainly, we're just trying to get a baseline understanding of what exists in our environment right now, since there's not been any studies done. Certainly there has been research done on oysters and bivalves elsewhere. I know along the Norwegian coast, the vast majority of samples of mussels had microplastics in them. But in terms of the effects, there's some research happening at UMASS Boston. I can't remember the woman's name who is doing that. If you reach out to me afterwards, I can get that to you. There were issues with the fecundity of the oysters, and they were smaller in size when they were affected by microplastics, and just generally less healthy, more susceptible to disease.
Great, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for more research in that area, for sure, going back to the food issue. Is the ban on plastic bottles only water bottles less than 32 ounces?
Yes, so the ban is less than 32 ounces and only for water. So even if it's sparkling water or flavored water, that's not included. It's basically tap water that you can get out of the tap, for instance.
All right, and then this question says, I may have missed this, but are we still dumping plastic in the ocean? My memory is no closer than 200 miles offshore. Do you have any information on some of those regulations on dumping?
The law of the sea, the unclosed document, prohibits dumping of plastics anywhere. So that shouldn't be done for any of the countries that have signed on to that, basically within the UN. But it still happens, unfortunately. I think the bigger issue, that accounts for about maybe 20%, not necessarily all the way out there, but just in general in the ocean that gets dumped, whether intentionally or unintentionally, through fishing gear getting lost. But the remaining 80% is us on land, and how it escapes here. So this is really one of the bigger issues to focus on.
Great. Okay, a couple of more specific questions. One is about pond water being tested for plastics. And to my knowledge, I don't think that pond water out here has been tested for plastic, but as we start to look a little more closely at things like the sand and the ocean and harbor waters, I think that it would be pretty interesting to figure out how much plastic is in there. And then also, as a follow-up question, how deep are the beach sand samples taken?
They are surface samples. So it's about an inch or so down into that little area. So not deep at all.
Great. Okay. And then here's a question asking about the opportunity for a campaign or a partnership with the steamship authority specifically, but maybe just in general, pointing out the water quality concerns on Nantucket and the environmental impacts of plastic and encouraging people to bring their own bottles, et cetera. And then I think this kind of just gets into the public outreach and publicizing the plastics ban in general, the filling stations, the locations and availability of them. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what the town and partners have done to try to support the plastics ban for people in that way.
Sure. So always getting information out is always been tricky for the town, and we're always looking for new ways to do it. We did reach out to the steamship and the High Line to try to get the message out that way. I believe it was included in the newsletter for the High Line. But on the boats, it's rather tricky to actually get a video to play or something that will get somebody's attention. Posters were put up on the steamship and then in Hyannis about the plastics ban and letting people know what's getting banned, kind of why, very briefly, and then some alternatives, including our refill stations around the island, where you can just take your water bottle and fill it up. There's a map with all the different locations. And certainly this year has been a little different with COVID and the fountain's not opening per the governor's instructions and orders. But I believe there may be one or two up, and it's a matter of calling the people who are operating them. The Athenaeum, I don't even know if it's open right now, but they, for instance, have one in their basement. We've had numerous meetings about the plastics ban, and certainly Rob McNeil, the director of the DPW, and I have given numerous talks in the past about different things relating to our waste management systems. But definitely reaching out to the larger community is something we're working on. And if you have recommendations of how to do that, please let us know. We go through the Civic League. We have a large list of people to reach out to, but certainly we're always happy to add more to the list and increase our reach with other languages. A lot of our waste documents are in Spanish now, and hopefully will be in more languages soon.
Great, thanks, Graeme. Yes, Graeme and I were both sitting on as part of an informal work group for the town leading up to the implementation of the plastics ban in June, sort of through last fall and winter, trying to do as much publicizing as possible about the plastics ban in creative ways to just inform people about it and really encourage everyone to help participate, because it's not, ideally, it's not something that becomes an enforcement issue, but rather something that everybody can kind of partner on and work together on. So we held several public informational sessions, and there definitely has been more of an initiative to get some filling stations established in various places. I know Stop and Shop was intending to put one in, obviously in the spring. A lot of that kind of got side railed and derailed, but I think that there will be a lot of incentive to get back on some of those projects in the future. Okay, another question. Is there any effort to educate smokers that cigarette butts are not harmless or biodegradable? Yeah, that's a great question.
We do not have any initiatives that way currently. You bring up a great point. They're actually hazardous, but they're so small that they're not deemed a hazardous substance that needs to go to hazardous waste day, for instance. But certainly they are a huge issue in our environment here. Litter Derby last year, groups were just spending time to plop down, sitting, picking up cigarettes along the sides of roads where people don't even hang out. So certainly an issue and something that we need to do more education about.
And then another question about getting more water bottle refill machines out around the island, especially downtown where the former fountains were located. I think you kind of touched on that a little bit there. I think, Graeme, is there a specific plastics ban page on the town website where a lot of that information is located? Is that the best place to go find the map of where those will eventually all be available?
Yes, so on the solid waste website for Nantucket, I put in the chat earlier all of the resources, so you could copy and paste all the links from there. From the solid waste webpage, you can access the 2020 plastic ban webpage, as well as the refill stations, the water refill stations webpage.
Great, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So for anyone who hasn't noticed, if you do open up the chat box in your Zoom window, all of those resources that Graeme shared at the end of her presentation, she's pasted in the chat box. So before you leave, you can highlight those and copy and paste them to a document or somewhere else, and then have them later on. Or you can just click on the links right now to open any of the web pages that you'd like in your browser for later. So one final comment question here, which is kind of an interesting idea that I have certainly seen in other communities, is someone who says that at their year-round home or place of residence, they have initiated a 5-cent fee for bags that commercial businesses will charge that sell food, et cetera. And the money goes towards environmental restoration and cleanup efforts. And that even though previous to that law, many grocery stores had given a rebate for each reusable bag that a customer brought, the bag law reduced bag consumption by around 80 to 90%, and then obviously provided a little bit of funding for additional efforts. Is anything like that contemplated here? They say people adapted very quickly at home, and is interested in your thoughts on that.
I'm curious about where in the US that is. My understanding is that's pretty tricky in Massachusetts, but certainly there's been a lot of research to show that deducting 10 cents off of your grocery purchase for bringing your own bag has a bit of an effect on behavior, but not much. But when you start charging even just say 3 cents, that's when you really see the behavior change. So certainly banning or charging is the way to go if you set up a model like that.
Great, and the participant has responded that it was in Washington, D.C. where that took place. Another really good question that I'd love for you to touch on, Graeme, is if someone finds any illegal dumping and can trace the origin of the persons responsible, can the DPW be called? And I think I would add on to that question, does the DPW ever work successfully to trace the source of illegal dumping, either on private property or other places of the island? And are there any enforcement efforts in place that we should know about?
Sure, thank you. So I would recommend taking a picture and you can send it to, you can call it into dispatch, the number 508-228-1212. It's in resources for the police. You can also send it to DPW. I keep a list of all the illegal dumping instances that we track, and I send that on to the police. And DPW has gotten involved in a little bit of enforcement, certainly limited what we're allowed to do as civilians rather than police. But when we find instances of illegal dumping of household trash or business trash in the municipal receptacles around town and at the parks, we've been sending tickets to, first a warning ticket to let people know if they weren't aware, and then a follow-up ticket if it happens subsequently, to make sure that doesn't happen. It's a big issue when DPW goes through, clears out the trash barrels around the island, and then somebody comes in immediately after and puts in household trash and fills the barrel with it. Then the people walking by, throwing things away, fill it to overflowing, and it creates a major litter issue, and we have this plastic pollution issue. And DPW doesn't know that all of a sudden this one individual barrel filled up so quickly. So that's an issue we've been trying to tackle, and we have not seen any repeat offenders after the second time, and we've only had 5 repeat offenders to start with. So out of the about 150 violation notices we've sent. So that's been really exciting. But certainly if you find instances of illegal dumping, you can call us or email us at the DPW and or report it to the police.
Great. And then I actually have a question for you, which is just to, if you could quickly maybe give us an update or a sense of how the change in waste streams and the introduction of the NERNIC has changed, or what the changes that you've seen or improvements you've seen in the waste stream since then out at the landfill facility.
Sure. So in 2019, last February, I guess, was when we instituted these changes at the drop-off. The haulers are still figuring out how they're going to make this change. And we've seen about a 10% reduction in contamination in the compostable waste in total. So haulers waste and drop-off waste combined when we look at samples. And we know this from small sample sizes, but waste audits that we do every summer and then winter. We just did one about 2 weeks ago, actually. And I was heartened to see that at the drop-off, we've actually continued getting better, about a couple percent points of less contamination in the compostable waste by weight. And given what's going on in the country with COVID and communities off island seeing 15 to 20% increases in contamination with the recyclables, for instance, I was a little concerned about what we would see. And so that was really exciting to see that we've at least maintained, if not gotten a little better from where we were before with the drop-off.
Great, thank you for that report. It's encouraging to hear that it's definitely helping. As you said, I think cleaning up our waste stream is a big part of addressing the plastics pollution on island. I think one of my favorite take-homes from your presentation is something that we all need to think about more and more. We've all heard the reduce, reuse, recycle for so long, but that extra first, most important R of refuse is one of the best ways that we can reduce plastics pollution. There are becoming more and more options for us as far as the purchases we make and how much plastic is involved in those purchases, and we can start to make a difference that way. So a huge thank you again to Graeme. Her experience and enthusiasm is going to be invaluable to us as we move forward as an island to continue addressing our solid waste management concerns, including reducing our contribution to coastal plastic pollution. I also want to thank our sponsors again and the Land Council's Water Fund, which is also a supporter of these programs. We were really happy to offer this series through the summer season, and we look forward to doing so again in the future. And I thank you all very much for attending and participating and for all the great questions. Nice. Thank you, Graeme.